Well, good morning. Welcome to episode 11 of Musings of a GenX Home Baker. We're going to go ahead and make Irish soda bread today, and you'll understand the theme of the episode probably by the title of what we're making today. And we're making Irish soda bread out of Cathal, Armstrong, and David Hagedorn's My Irish Table. And he is the chef with Homeland and Restaurant Eve. So we're going to make our recipe, our Irish soda bread, from that cookbook today. But I wanted to tell you about the t-shirt that I'm wearing and why I'm wearing it. It is true that it doesn't have any relationship to Ireland, but it does have a relationship to one of the folks that went with us to Ireland and who is one of our best friends. So it's actually my husband's best friend, Ed, and this is going to feature Ed today because he went on our Ireland trip with my dad, Ed, Chris, and myself in 2006. And it was probably one of the best vacations we've ever had. We were there for about 2 weeks and we did it on our own. We rented a car and drove ourselves and so forth. And so we'll tell you some more stories about that. But back to Johnny Marr. So, huge fan of the Smiths and independently Morrissey and Johnny Marr. And we saw Johnny Marr at St. Andrews in Detroit. I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 2 years. You know, it's that's 2 year thing that I keep talking about. And before this, they were just getting back from New York City after doing some research for a project they're working on. And literally that morning they had flown in from New York and we were going to see the concert that night. And I was going to meet up with them in Ann Arbor and then go from there to St. Andrews in Detroit for this concert. And you know you're tired and you know you're with good friends, best friends, because going to St. Andrews, I think I've talked about, it is hard at a certain age to stand on the main floor at the front of in front of the stage. So in this particular case, I thought, you know what, I'm going to get the seats. There are seats in the mezzanine or balcony above. They're kind of like little bistro seats, and then they have some lower ones. So I'm thinking, I'm going to go ahead and get 3 of those so we don't have to stand because it's really hard and tiring after a certain point of time. So we did that. We were sitting up on the balcony just side by side. And Chris, even though he'd also been on this research trip, we were all pretty jazzed. We're very excited to see Johnny Marr. And anyway, just really excited to see him. And we look over at a certain point, and Ed is so tired that he has fallen asleep. This is Johnny Marr with the Smiths. For all of you who are fans of theirs, their music is not subtle, and it's not music to fall asleep by, but that's how tired he was. We look over, and Ed has his plastic beer cup, because that's how they serve beer at St. Andrews, and he has sort of his retro, although just still the same one. Somebody asked him about his retro North Face fleece, and it's the one he's had all these years. He had tucked his beer plastic cup in kind of where the V came for the zipper on his North Face, and he just was leaning back, kind of resting, just had his hands crossed. He looked so peaceful with this beer cup, North Face fleece zipped up, very comfortably sleeping, while Johnny Marr from the Smiths is rocking it out. But he looked so peaceful and so calm, we didn't bother to wake him up. Now, I should tell you, I have never made this before, which is, I also think, part of the adventure that we've been having is not always being assured of the outcome. So there is still this magic in the world over story, right? How important that is, and just also experiencing new ways or new things to make that I've never made before. So this is kind of a fun way to experience and try new things. So we're going to go ahead and get started on this Irish soda bread. So basically we have very simple ingredients. This is another 1-day bake, which we've talked about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are literally 5 ingredients, which is pretty amazing. We have 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, a 1/2 cup of cold unsalted butter. We're going to dice it, and then he talks about generously putting it on the bread once it's out of the oven, so I have no problem doing that. And then 2 1/4 cups buttermilk. So this is the one item that's kind of cool that we haven't used yet. So we've used a variety of different ingredients, and in this particular case, we're going to be making a well in the middle and putting the buttermilk in our bowl. So we've already preset the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the day, we will bake it for about an hour until well browned, and then we'll transfer the bread to a wire rack and let it cool for about 20 minutes. But for the most part, the oven's already at 400 degrees. We are going to go ahead and lightly dust our baking sheet with flour. So just lightly dust, it particularly notes that. So I'm not going to use parchment paper. I'm going to do exactly what they're recommending. So you know what, let's go ahead and get started on this Irish soda bread adventure. So we're going to start out with adding 4 cups of flour to our bowl. And hopefully I will get this right while I'm telling you stories from Ireland, because again, it was one of the best vacations we've ever had. And my mother, had she still been alive, would have loved this trip. We are huge Anglophiles of all kinds, and she would have just loved this trip. We had beautiful weather, even though Ireland is very lush and verdant. In this particular case, we had the advantage of going after the rains had come, so everything was green and beautiful and lush. So that was pretty amazing. So we flew into Dublin and we had a rental car, and Chris had decided, so that's my 4 cups of flour, Chris had decided that he really did want to go ahead and get a manual. So he was the only person out of the 4 of us that had driven a manual. So that meant that he had to really drive for that 2 weeks. And it was a package where you had the rental car, and then you stayed in different bed and breakfasts. So we had already prepaid. We had been able to select the bed and breakfast, and so we knew we were staying along the way. And it ended up becoming the different bed and breakfast owners became like family to us. I mean, it was like Chris had done a photo montage afterward of all the innkeepers we had met, because each one had a great story, and we had stories from each one, believe it or not, after that 2-week time span, because they were each unique and interesting, and depending on where they were from location. So, and definitely Ireland is where you can go for the road less traveled. I will say that is one of the few places I've traveled nationally or internationally that it's the roads less traveled leads you to some really interesting places. So we're going to go ahead and add 1 teaspoon of baking soda to our dry ingredients. So you know we've been using a lot of baking powder, but in this particular recipe, we're going to use our active ingredient is going to be soda, okay? So that is our 1 teaspoon baking soda, and then we're going to go ahead and add 1 teaspoon, same amount, of kosher salt. All right, and then that's pretty much it of our dry ingredients, those 3 items. So you know what we've got out, the dough whisk. We're going to go ahead and just move those ingredients, the dry ingredients, around. So that's, as I say, for something we've never made before, we have done this before. This isn't stressful. So that's great. All right, so we're going to go ahead then and we're going to cut up or dice the chilled unsalted butter. We're going to, as I say, do a 1/2 cup, and that's 1 stick. So if you want to know from what that is. All right, so we're going to actually talk about dicing it, and we're going to go ahead and dice it. And basically, once I cut it, I'm going to use my fingertips, which I like getting my hands in there and working anyway, because we did that at the scones too. So, that's very pleasurable. So I'm going to go ahead and add the butter to the flour mixture, and we're supposed to rub the pieces into the flour, and it's still supposed to be coarse. This dough is not supposed to be fully formed. It still has a certain amount of just blended parts to it, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut up my butter here so we can work it into the dough, or the dry ingredients. And I'm going to tell you an interesting thing that happened on our roads less traveled. So we did follow road less traveled, and Chris ended up, as I said, driving the whole time because he was the one who could do stick, which is a different experience. I've been on tour buses overseas when I've ridden on the opposite side of the road. I've never been in a car where someone has driven on the opposite side of the road with, a manual stick shift. And so we stayed in Dublin a few days, because we wanted to do the Book of Kells, all that cool stuff, and experience Dublin. And then we wanted to go to the main Guinness plant so we could experience, they have a great museum there. And what was kind of interesting is that people in Ireland, and sort of the gentleman that I were with, remember my dad, Ed, and Chris, my husband, people start drinking Guinness for lunch. Maybe they think of it as a health type of thing. So it's, I have to kind of keep up with the boys because I'm not really a huge drinker, nor do I like Guinness. But I do like hard cider. So I will tell you that hard cider was my beverage of choice. But anyway, we went to the Guinness plant, and they have this great rooftop pub kind of thing where you can get a Guinness, but also great views of downtown Dublin. So anyway, we were heading out of town to start our next part of the journey because we were going to go up into Galway and all that, but fly out of Shannon, which went back through Dublin and so forth, and fly home after 2 weeks. So we start the, sort of southern loop of what we were going to do. And we were going to go see this house and garden kind of place. Not an artist home and studio, but still really cool. It was still one of the country houses with this great, well-known garden. And I don't know what it was. I was sitting at that time, still, I was allowed. I sat in the front seat next to Chris while my dad and Ed were in the back seat. And we were getting off on the little exit to go to this country house or whatever. And for some reason, I don't know if it was to prevent tall buses or whatever going underneath it, but there was a bar that came across onto poles on this little exit where we were going off. And for some reason, it felt, even though we were in a little, Toyota, I don't know what kind of car we had, but it was just a sedan. And it felt like we were going to hit that bar. And so I screamed and bent down into the seat like we were going to hit the bar. There wasn't any way we were going to hit the bar, but the screaming and the going down into the seat, I was kind of banished from the front seat for the rest of the time we were in Ireland. So it was my dad and I in the back seat and Ed and Chris in the front seat, and pretty much banned to the back seat because of my small sort of screaming, eking episode. And so I was officially banished to the back seat. I'm going to go ahead and work the butter with my fingertips. I'm going to rub it into the dry mixture. And we know this from other episodes and other baking that this is the tactile experience, and really, so much in creative memory, or memory in general, comes from what happens, what you touch from your hand to your head to your heart. And it's all connected, and we can't, it's sort of like when we hug somebody or we shake their hand, or we work on a creative project of, gardening or whatever you do with your hands, baking, cooking. It's that experience that you have that really follows through with what's happening in your entire system. And I think we have to remember not to get too far away from that. And, in a digital age, I think that's why we're coming back to some of our basics, because we're kind of missing that really evocative connection that we just have been missing. So, and I think for me too, I was never, I don't think ever meant to sit in front of a computer for, 8 hours a day. So here we are. So that's nice. This is nice and coarse. We've rubbed the butter into the flour. Okay. It's very nice. Okay. All right, that's great. Okay, we've done that, and when we did the scones, it kind of had us do the same thing with different ingredients. But today, what it tells us is we want to make a center of our flour mixture in our bowl. Okay, so I'm going to add that little bowl here in my flour and butter mixture. And then we're going to pour in the buttermilk. And it says, with your hands, work the buttermilk into the dough so it is incorporated. But do not overmix the dough. And I cannot stress this enough, that is one of the key points of this recipe. So I have 2 1/4 cups of buttermilk that I'm going to pour into my well. And I think, to be honest, if you use some type of spatula or something to mix it, it might just kind of make a mess. So, because the 2 1/4 as it is, I didn't make a big enough well. So I am going to use a spatula to get all of this lovely buttermilk into our flour. And then I'm going to use my hands to work it in. So remember what I said, it's still supposed to be fairly loose. And that is a consistent thing. There will be a point when we turn it out onto my floured surface to work just very slightly, but it's just really to make the shape. we are going to do an 8-inch diameter. And so I'll get to bring out my tape measure again, because now it's the baking tape measure, not the house project tape measure. So that's coming along really nicely. My hands are very buttermilky, and I can definitely, the overriding smell right now is buttermilk, but it is lovely, you know, the coarse mixture with the buttermilk, and I'm just making a complete and utter mess. I can only imagine when I'm going to have to mop off of the floor after this. That's not unusual for me to have to mop quite a bit off of the floor around my baking station here after we're done. But okay, so we're working this in. We want to make sure that everything has been attached to the buttermilk, right? So even though it has to still be loose, we still want the moisture of the buttermilk to be part of our dry ingredients. So we just make sure that's worked in fine, because when we flip it out onto our surface, it has to bind somehow, right? And the buttermilk is the sort of the binding part of this. So I'm just trying to get it off my hands, but making sure it's, you know, I'm going to have more on my hands than I am in the bowl here. Okay. So we're going to get ready and put this out on a floured work surface to just lightly pull together, form into an 8-inch diameter round loaf. And then we're going to put it onto that lightly floured baking sheet. So we're going to go ahead and do that now on a lightly floured baking sheet, still maintaining our kind of 8 inches, and we're going to go ahead and get that in the oven. There are a couple of other great stories that have to do with some of the bed and breakfasts that we stayed at. One place we stayed, we had probably the best night's sleep ever. I mean, we slept like logs. It just felt fresh. It was just the best sleep, and we couldn't figure out why. And so when we came down in the morning for another full Irish breakfast, it is true, okay, a little segue here, I did ask where all of the pigs were, because it seemed like a lot of the bed and breakfast served a full Irish breakfast every morning, which is, we finally at a certain point had to get oatmeal or something else, because that's a lot if you're not used to it. But all we were seeing were sheep. We were involved in a lot of like sheep to car things on the road. We'd get involved in like different sheep brigades or whatever they are. Anyway, and so I said, well, where are all the pigs, considering how much, you know, how many Irish breakfasts we have? Well, they're all in the mid part of the country, and we were pretty much on the coast. So that solved that problem. But again, great night's sleep. We asked the innkeeper, like, wow, you know, we just had the best night's sleep. Is there some secret? And she said, well, you know, I iron my sheets. So that was the magic tidbit on many magic things that we had, experiences that we had in Ireland. And so on our anniversary, when Chris remembers, he'll iron our sheets, because it's such a great treat. And it's just something about the crispness and the fresh smell, and something about the, you know, ironing them and how crisp the sheets are, that are just, you just get a great night's sleep. It's just really completely fantastic. So try that sometime if you don't, every once in a while, to treat yourself. Go ahead and iron your sheets. And then another funny thing was, we were in, I think it was in Dingle, which has, you know, all these little pubs. This is a great music scene. And we were, of course, down at the pubs every night just to be part of community and experience it. And there was one night when there was one pub we were in, and we were all, well, not all singing. Chris does not sing, but he, you know, this is the one place that I just sing. I don't care what anybody thinks, because everybody else is singing too. And there's, you know, Guinness and hard cider involved. And I realized we were singing a lot of John Denver songs. So at least I knew the lyrics. So, you know, when you grew up at the time I did, you know all of the words to Country Roads. So that was kind of fun. But at one of the bed and breakfasts we stayed at in Dingle, the gentleman of the couple that we stayed with, he was a musician, and he played in a lot of the bands in the pubs and so forth. He wasn't going to be performing while we were there. So on one of our breakfast mornings, he went ahead and gave us a small, like, personal concert during breakfast, which was, you know, where is that going to happen? So, and that was the same place where we were at breakfast, and a cow, apparently some of the cows had gotten loose, and we were sitting at the window of the house to the outside, and a cow literally came up and stood at our dining window, which we just thought was a great experience. Now, I grew up on a farm, so it's not like, it's just that we had never had cows come up to any windows in our house. So he had to quickly go out and take care of that. But, just all these different experiences. And we stayed with one couple, one of the innkeepers, and they still talked about the time when JFK visited Ireland. So they were an older couple, and they still had really strong feelings about that visit. So we just were able to hear some great stories from, as I say, these different innkeepers that really made the magic of Ireland so evocative. Well, I want to tell you about this new book I've been reading over the past week. I just started it, so I haven't gotten far in, and especially tell I don't have that many tabs in it yet. But Pete Souza or somebody, I think, had this on their Instagram account of, kind of check this out. And it's called Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, by the former United States Chief of Protocol, Capricia Penevic Marshall. I apologize if I have said parts of her name incorrectly, but this has been so fascinating. It's always interesting to go behind the scenes lookabouts, right? And this may become more apparent also as we go to more, lately during the COVID-19, we've been going to more Zoom meetings and WebExes and just a lot more on our computers, that you're missing so much body language and cultural cues that we rely on. And this really talks about sort of kind of behind the scenes on how important it is to make sure you're being respectful to different countries' customs, and even just whether you shake their hand or what kind of food you have and how the flags are situated. And there's so many details of the spatial part of the room that can lead to a successful summit or not a successful summit. So it's very interesting. I'm not that far in yet, so I will keep you posted. But there were a couple of things that stood out to me, and one of them wasn't even a diplomacy thing, but something I heard from my mother a lot when I was growing up. So I know that you hear about teens being able to sleep in, or, my kids slept till noon. Not in our house. That was not going to happen. There was no sleeping in the home that I grew up in with my mother. And she talks particularly about she wakes to the sun, as was her custom. And she said, it's from my earliest days as a child. My mother would flick on the light in my room and state, "The sun is up and so should you be." I don't know if my mother literally crafted that sentence like that, but she was definitely someone who would not let us sleep in when we were kids. If she was up, we were up. And so I've always been an early birder anyway, and now just naturally get up early as well on the weekends, or even, even when we're on vacation and, things like that. But when I read that line, instant flash to my mother doing the same thing and coming into my room. To be honest, it wasn't even, till noon. It was like 7 a.m. So it was pretty, pretty tight ship. But anyway, and she also says that, she said, my friend Larry Denham, who was an assistant chief of protocol under 3 successive administrations, explains that a protocol expert must anticipate problems and distractions before they occur, have an understanding of cultural differences, and know how one's appearance and body language conveys signals. And I think that's something we have to remember when we're not together a lot. When we're in meetings and we can't get visual cues from the people we're with, sometimes you may end up going in a direction that you might not have had to have gone down if you'd only been able to read somebody's body language. Because, sometimes what people say might not be physically what they're conveying. And sometimes I think that's been one of the hardest things for me anyway, to be in all these WebEx meetings, is just missing people's body cues or language. She also talks about always confirm the number of restrooms before you book an event to ensure the total is sufficient for your guest list. How many times have you been at a conference or a meeting and thought the exact same thing? And this is a person of protocol, so it's not just me that wonders why sometimes when you're expecting all of these people that you haven't built in enough restrooms. There's code and there's real life. So again, check out Protocol. If you like really interesting political behind the scenes type of lookabouts, this is a great book. One other Ireland experience that needs to be mentioned is one that happened literally on the road less traveled. Like I mentioned, very easy to find, get away, roads less traveled. So we were on our southern loop, and we sort of got off of the main road and looped down into the small town on the coast called Ardmore. And they had this great round tower near the cemetery, and it was just a very small kind of fishing village. Not on any tourist list, but we just wanted to experience, as I say, we had our own wheels, so we were able to go where we wanted to go. So we're in this small town, remember, my father, my husband, and my husband's best friend, Ed. And Ed and I went into the small grocery store, and to get provisions for lunch, probably some bread and some cheese and maybe some salami or whatever we had, and maybe some fruit and something to drink. So just that's what we did a lot of, because when you're in these smaller towns, there aren't always necessarily a lot of restaurants. So we went in to get the provisions for our loved ones. Ed and I went into this little store, pre-cell phone. None of the four of us had a cell phone on that trip. This was 2006, like I said. We had left, my dad and Chris had stayed in the car. We come out, we look to where the car should have been, and the car wasn't there. My father and my spouse were no longer in the space that we had left them, which is an odd feeling. Now, we're in Ireland, it's safe, it's nothing like that. We didn't have that feeling, but there is a moment that you wonder, where did they go? Why would they have left? We have no phones to call each other. We've gone in lovingly to get our loved ones and family provisions for lunch, and we came out and they're just gone. And we didn't know what to do. We're just standing outside of the shop thinking, well, what do we do now? Like, are they going to come back, do you suppose? Like, we weren't in there that long. It's a small shop. I think I've been very clear. Small village, small shop. That's why only two of us went in. This wasn't a big place. So to come out and not see your loved ones waiting for you was quite a shock. So we just kind of stood there, because really, what else could we do? We looked down the street. It wasn't a long street. We looked around. No car matched the one that we had rented, nor with the people that we knew in it. So we just waited. We just didn't know what else to do. So we just literally stood outside this little convenience store with our provisions and hoped somehow they would come back. Because where would we have gone? We didn't know where they might have gone, or where, how, why, all of those things. So, a good while later, around the horn comes my husband driving the car, and he pulls up, and we're like, where did you go? Why did you leave? I'm like, oh, I thought you guys might take the groceries up to the cemetery where that round barn was. And it was actually kind of up the steep hill that would have been kind of tough with, like groceries. I don't know why they got that idea. It never even crossed my mind that we would do that. And that's what they thought. And they were sticking with that story. Oh, we thought you were going to walk up that hill to the cemetery, to the roundhouse with all these groceries. Okay, and thank goodness they realized we weren't coming at a certain point and came back to pick us up. But you can imagine, you're in a different place and you come out not expecting to see your conveyance vehicle gone, or the people you were with just gone, because they thought you were going to walk up this hill to the cemetery with groceries. I don't know. It still today really is not, I don't think, a great explanation, but my husband and my father did not stray from that reasoning. They haven't, and it's been, like I said, it was in 2006, 14 years, and they have both stuck with that story. So anyway, funny story. It was one of those weird, cool, all of these things add on to all this great narrative of our trip to Ireland. So just a funny story. We still talk about it today, although still everybody's sticking to their stories. We still ask why, and they still maintain, well, we thought you were going to walk up the hill. So you know what? Who's to say? But anyway, we will, the bread is browning up nicely in the oven, and we will be back with you once it comes out. We have taken the bread, the Irish soda bread, out of the oven. It was in the oven for an hour. We have taken it out and put it on our drying rack, and it's going to go ahead and cool down for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to taste it because that's always part of what we need to do. But, you know, in talking about our Ireland trip, I don't necessarily think of all of the touristy spots that we went, and we did. So, I mean, you've got to do all the touristy spots. It was the first time we had been there. So we went to the Cliffs of Moher and visited the main towns that you would visit when you're in Ireland if you're doing the Southern Loop. We also did the roads less traveled, like I mentioned, which we could do because we had our own vehicle. So that was a really nice element to that trip and made it as a special. Like I said, there's no really right or wrong whether you're on a tour or you're independent, but in this particular case for us, we did it independently, and it made for some great stories. And it's those stories you remember, which is interesting. You don't necessarily remember, or you do. I mean, you knew the different sites that you visited, but it's all these little snippets of stories and interactions you had with people that is what you tell, and the whole feeling of a place are those stories that you felt, you experienced, you lived it, and you were open to talking to the different people, you know, talking to the innkeepers, and then they'll maybe serenade you with music at breakfast. So we were so open, and likewise the Irish were so open, and it was one of the best trips we've ever had because it was taking the roads less traveled, but also just being open to all of the people we met, retaining all of these stories together. It was one of the best trips. We keep talking about that. Each moment was special. I mean, there was a time we used Rick Steves' sort of travel books quite a bit, and there was one point when we were out in a field with no one else, trying to find this Celtic cross in the middle of this field, Irish field, lush green, beautiful blue sky day, and we come upon, literally it was in a field, this beautiful Celtic cross, and you had those experiences or moments over and over in Ireland, and that just was part of the overall experience and story of what we experienced there. So if you get a chance to Ireland to go, do it with good friends and family, and take the roads less traveled. I'm very excited to go ahead and cut into this traditional Irish soda bread. We've let it cool for about 20 minutes, and it still feels pretty warm, but to be honest, I don't think I can wait any longer to see if it turned out okay. It's beautiful golden brown on the top. You can see sort of this cross pattern, not as maybe deeply indented as others, but you know, it still has these sort of little cloves, I would call it. So we're gonna go ahead and try it out. It's browned up very nicely. It also, you can hear the crispness of it. And again, I have never made Irish soda bread before. And, you know, of course, for me, I always like to add a little jam to anything, but we're just going to add the butter like he recommended. It smells so delicious. Very moist on the inside, crispy on the outside, but definitely moist on the inside because we had that buttermilk. So I just want you to see how beautiful this is. And we're going to go ahead and put on a generous, and maybe I'll break it down a little bit more so I don't make a complete mess of it. And we're going to put a little bit of butter on it. I know he said slather, but, well, you know, we'll see how it tastes. Okay, the bread is still a little warm, so it's slightly melty. So we're going to go ahead and test it. As I said, first time Irish soda bread. Wow. Oh boy, that is so, I don't know, it's just really beautiful. It almost has And I know this word does not equate to food per se, because it's more of, when I use the word lush, I think of more landscape, but it has this beautiful velvety lush flavor. It's just so smooth and delicious. Wow, that is so good. Well, we definitely picked a good recipe to try our first time on this Irish soda bread. And it's really been a great, fun day to talk about a trip that we've taken with friends and family combined. That was a friends and family trip. And we'll talk about Ed a little bit more in a different episode, because I really want to talk about the friendship we've had with Ed, and especially his parents, because Ed's parents are definitely also part of our family, second parents, all those relationships that we have that we've talked about throughout these episodes. But today we really wanted to focus on our Ireland trip by making this great Irish soda bread.